Welcome inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Dan Hope joined by Andy Anders. It's been a while, Andy. We haven't done one of these in a few weeks.
It has been a hot minute and a pretty hot day for one as well.
Yeah, nice warm day out here for Ohio State football camp. Ohio State very much in the heart of June recruiting season. And we've been out here covering those camps, but we're also here today for Woody Hayes Athletic Center for a Ross Bjork press conference that was quite long, quite informative. I think it went about an hour and 15 minutes. Ross Bjork talking about the newly approved House settlement, revenue sharing, how that's all going to go into effect for Ohio State. A lot of kind of state of Ohio State type stuff too. A lot of questions about some of the hot topics that have surrounded Ohio State and college sports lately, whether that be kickoff times, whether that be college football playoff expansion, Big Ten expansion, what have you. It was a lot of ground covered today in that 75-minute press conference, which you'll be able to watch on our YouTube channel. We won't talk about all of it here, but we'll talk about some of the key points. And I think probably the biggest one, starting with Ross Bjork revealing what Ohio State's revenue sharing plan is going to be. There's that $20.5 million cap that's out there that has been created by the settlement. Now, $2.5 million of that is going to be allotted to the 91 additional scholarships that Ohio State has added from where it was at last year. The rules of this new settlement state that if you add new scholarships from the previous roster limits, that those up to $2.5 million count against that $20.5 million cap. And so that leaves $18 million for Ohio State to directly share revenue with its athletes. And Ohio State has decided it's going to go with just 4 sports to start revenue sharing: football, men's basketball, women's volleyball. Football, obviously, Ross Bjork did not get into the specific numbers, but I think it's fair to assume the majority of that money is going to go to football players. It is by far the biggest revenue driver for the university. Men's basketball is the second biggest revenue driver, but you've got Title IX requirements that you've got to satisfy. So that's why women's basketball, women's volleyball, while they don't generate quite as much revenue as men's basketball does, you look at them in terms of women's sports, they're the most revenue-generating women's sports. Therefore, they have been chosen to also be included in this revenue sharing. And so I thought that was interesting to hear because we hadn't really heard before today how exactly Ohio State was going to do this in terms of sharing revenue. We weren't sure if it was going to be across a wide variety of sports. But now, Ross Bjork making it clear that Ohio State's really going to focus on kind of a more narrow group of sports, even though he strongly reiterated today that Ohio State will keep all 36 sports.
Right, and I think one of the interesting things to hear him talk about, too, is kind of how this affects the broader landscape and how other schools, like, it's going to be about finding the best approach to this new system, school to school. Talking about $18 million, right, 2.5 going to scholarships. Indications from Ross were a lot of other schools, that's going to be the format as well. Ohio State adding in that number of 91 new scholarships, and that's similar to what other schools are doing. So how do you employ that $18 million, then how do you incorporate NIL into it? It was a lot of interesting discussion, too, about how the NIL model is going to work going forward with the improvements, with the regulations, and the different stipulations that were made in the House settlement, the review committees that now have to approve these NIL deals for athletes. And with the Buckeye Sports Group forming, the partnership between the Ohio State Athletics Department and Learfield that's going to oversee a lot of Ohio State's NIL deals for its athletes going forward, or all of them actually, bringing them all under one umbrella, which I think is a great idea. Ross talked about that was the aim, was to bring it all under one umbrella so you could manage it, give resources to athletes to manage it, but it's also going to make sure that all of Ohio State's NIL dealings are above board in the sense that the House settlement calls for. And so I think hearing Ross dive into some of those details, too, of how now you're going to balance the revenue sharing, the direct payment of athletes from the athletic department with NIL now coming under Ohio State's own watchful eye.
And we've talked about it for years. This was always what made the most sense in terms of how athletes should be paid. They should be getting a direct cut of a revenue that schools make, and all of this NIL stuff, payment stuff, the school should be overseeing it. There shouldn't be this required delineation of NIL has to come from outside the school, outside the revenue. that these schools bring in. And so I think, this is all the logical next step that we all felt was going to happen sooner than later, to where it's no longer going to be this outside collector-driven system. That's not to say that, V Foundation, the 1870 Society, the people who are involved with that are still going to have some involvement in this. There's still going to be those natural NIL deals of whether it's Caleb Downs or Jeremiah Smith or Bruce Thornton or Jelani Cambridge or whoever it might be across Ohio State sports, having the opportunity to go find endorsement deals for themselves. That's all still going to be a part of this. But now, instead of this really, we're funneling money to players, but kind of sort of pretending we don't actually have a hand in it, now there is going to be that direct communication of, hey, this is how much money we have to allot to our football team, and this is how we're going to distribute it to our players. And, to your point, I mean, one of the points that did come up was, could this hurt Ohio State in, say, men's basketball? Because you're going to have schools out there. You think of like a Kentucky or a Duke or a North Carolina or a Kansas. They might choose to allot a higher portion of their budget to men's basketball, whereas we know at Ohio State, football is going to get the majority of that revenues, because trying to win national championships in football is going to come above all else here in Columbus. And so that's going to be something that Ohio State's going to have to navigate. It's fair to wonder, like, is this going to be a positive or a negative for Ohio State? We don't really know. I mean, the thing that makes it a positive for Ohio State is the fact that Ohio State generates more revenue than every other athletic department in the country. And so that piece of a pie that Ohio State is sharing with the athletes is far smaller for Ohio State than it is for most other schools, which means that Ohio State has more money to spend on everything else. The downside of that is, because of that cap, where Ohio State could probably afford to spend even more on its athletes than most other schools, that cap is going to level the playing field a little bit, at least for that top group of schools that can afford to pay the maximum dollar amount. And so we're going to have to see a little bit over time whether this ends up being a positive or a negative for Ohio State. But I think the good news is for Ohio State is I think they've got a very forward-thinking leader in Ross Bjork, who has been calling for a system like this for years, who is ready to embrace this kind of system, and who is going to make sure that Ohio State is aligned across its 36 sports, across its administration, to take advantage of this new system and to adapt as things continue to evolve.
Right, and I think it's perfectly fair to commend Ross for what I know both of us view as a very proactive move with the formation of Buckeye Sports Group to bring this all under the NIL umbrella. And to your point, I think it is going to be interesting to see, even kind of zooming out beyond Ohio State. You talk about school, those big-time marquee basketball programs funneling money into those kinds of programs. There are other schools, they could do it in other sports, where if you focus your NIL, your revenue-sharing resources, primarily your revenue-sharing resources now, into one sport, into one pursuit, you can really make a lot of positive changes for your program in that area. And of course, it is still about having the right people in place to use those resources, and I don't want to get that lost. No amount of money can fix if you have a bad head coach of a program, if you have bad administration, no amount of money is going to fix that. But it is a way to funnel resources behind a program that you believe in and that you think you can build and maybe have success in where you didn't in the past. So I'm excited to see how that impacts the national landscape. Beyond a lot of this revenue sharing and NIL conversation, I think a huge sticking point for Ohio State fans the past year, with all the noon games that happened last year, I think a lot of fans will probably agree with Ross Bjork when he said today that Ohio State fans deserve more marquee night games. The unfortunate side of that is it doesn't sound like there's a lot of maneuverability from Ohio State, and that's something we've kind of talked about before when it comes to the current deal that the Big Ten has with Fox. Fox is pretty much set on that noon window. It's been great for their business model. Ohio State has propped up that business model in a lot of ways by having so many marquee games on Big Noon kickoff. But under the current contract structure, it is hard. But Ross Bjork still, the main word that he used today was flexibility. He wants more options, more flexibility for Ohio State to have some of these night games. I think we can all agree that this game against Texas, which is going to be a noon kickoff after everything that happened there, really it feels like it should have been a night game. Ohio State fans deserved that to be a night game. But it's just where it's at right now with this current TV deal, and how much can Ross Bjork really push Fox to get more night games for Ohio State.
Russ Bjork said it himself. Ohio State is carrying the day for Big Noon. I mean, you look at the Big Noon ratings, its highest rated games, almost all of them have included Ohio State. And so, Ross Bjork recognizes that where a lot of the fans' frustration is coming from is it's like, because of the way this contract is structured, Ohio State just keeps getting selected to play these noon games. And, other schools that maybe aren't making as much money from a conference are getting rewarded with more night games because of how the contract is set up. And so, I think the good news for Ohio State fans is I think Ohio State has a leader in Ross Bjork who recognizes it's not fair to our fan base. It's not fair for us to not get more marquee home night games. And so I think there's certainly going to be a push from Ohio State the next time those TV contracts come up for, hey, there's got to be more flexibility, as he called it, built in. Could that be, just more communication between the networks and the schools of, hey, we're going to trade slots this week. Like, hey, there's going to be some kind of clause built in where, Fox can trade slots with NBC a certain amount of times per year, and that could allow them to work together for then a big Ohio State game to be at night instead of noon that week. I think that's kind of what Ross was hinting at is in the next contract, he would prefer it, Ohio State would prefer it, if it's not Fox has to be at noon every week, CBS has to be at 3:30 every week, NBC has to be at 7:30 every week. Because, as he said, the reality is Fox pays most of the money in this Big Ten TV deal. So they are entitled to get the best games, and because of how big a brand Ohio State is and how good Ohio State consistently is, the Ohio State game very often is going to be the best game, especially when Ohio State is playing another marquee opponent. So the unfortunate reality for Ohio State fans is until this contract ends in, I believe, 2030, probably going to see a lot more noon games. But I do think that, Ross Bjork, he's trying. I mean, he said that the idea of moving the Texas game really came to him back in November. And so he's trying to find ways to rectify this. But the reality is the contract being written the way it is, Ohio State fans are going to have to brace themselves for 6 more years of a lot of noon games because, Fox, the contract is what it is. Fox pays most of the money. They're going to want the best games on their network. And a lot of times that's going to be Ohio State. So unless they somehow all come together to change this contract and build more flexibility in, you're probably going to see the Buckeyes playing at noon a lot.
Yeah, build more flexibility in, or maybe you change the structure of how the TV draft works. A lot of people know or are aware of how, like, the networks draft different weekends. Fox has a lot of the high-end picks. They get the first 2 picks in that draft and get to
first 3, actually. We got that wrong before.
That's right. First 3 picks in that draft and get to really set the bar there. So maybe it's more of an exchange of picks between the networks. Maybe Fox allows other networks to trade up and get a marquee Ohio State game to put at night. There's a lot of things that you can try to do behind the scenes, but like you said, for the most part, it really is, as long as this current contract is in place for 6 years, that's just where it is for Ohio State. I think the other small thing to touch on, too, is the formation of the Center for, I got to remember exactly here, Center for Sports Intelligence and Strategy.
Something like that.
Something like that was formed today, or the formation of it was announced today by Ohio State. And I think we've talked throughout this conversation about Ross being forward-thinking, and I don't want to overlook that formation of that center or it's not like a physical center, as Ross explained it today. It's more like a collection of people who know how to manage these things, but getting ahead of, and a lot of it is data analytics and figuring out how to optimize rosters, how to optimize sports performance, how to optimize recruiting, how to optimize scheduling through data and analytics. That I think in today's world, that is so much of what drives decision making, and the best decisions is data-informed decisions. We've seen analytics playing a bigger role in major sports. I think this is a great resource for coaches to come together on a unified front, similar to Buckeye Sports Group. I really think Ohio State, under Ross Bjork right now, is doing a really good job of being proactive with the modern climate that is coming out of the House settlement.
And Ross Bjork said it even in terms of determining how they're going to share revenue. Those conversations are very metrics driven, and so I think certainly they're looking at the numbers. I mean, he said it before, he said it again today. Ohio State is the only school with a $300 million operating budget, and so Ohio State is really spending all it can to help put its teams in position to go compete for championships, as we saw the football team do successfully this past season. They've also got to keep looking for ways to generate more revenue. And, certainly that came up when Ross Bjork was talking about college football playoff expansion. And, he didn't come out and stump for a specific model the way we saw a lot of people in the SEC do over the last couple of weeks. But he has said, he is in favor of expansion. He mentioned one of the specific reasons is we need more content. More games equals more TV money. And so, we can clearly see the momentum moving toward 14 or 16. Ross Bjork didn't say really if he has a strong preference one way or the other on what that model should be. I did think it was interesting when he was asked about non-conference games going forward, like the big ones we're going to see the next couple of years between Texas, Alabama on the schedule after that. He was asked, will you look to schedule more or less of those games going forward? And his answer was TBD. Basically, it's going to depend on what this new playoff format looks like. If this new playoff format is constructed in a way that rewards teams for better strength of schedule, Ohio State will look to schedule more of those marquee games. If the college football playoffs simply looks at your record, where you're 12-0, 11-1, whatever, then Ohio State's probably going to play a lot of cupcakes in the non-conference schedule. So I, for one, certainly hope that the college football playoff works toward building a format that rewards people for playing those big games. Because I know as we think about this season starting in about 2.5 months, it's a heck of a lot more exciting building up to a game against Texas than it is building up to a game against Akron.
Oh, absolutely. I like, just to echo that sentiment, I really do hope that a lot of it is going to be defining a better committee structure and how the teams are selected for the college football playoff, whenever the format changes. Not to say that you do away with the CFP committee or anything like that, but just, again, it's got to be something that rewards strength of schedule, because it's good for all parties if teams are incentivized to schedule strong non-conference games. It's going to draw more viewership and more interest to the sport. It's going to get more revenue to the teams that are involved. But if you're not incentivized to do it from a post-season perspective, why would you do it? So you have to. That has to be a consideration as this new format is discussed. And I also think Ross, when he was asked about the SEC coming out and insisting on certain formats, had a good approach to it. Basically said we should take a step back and discuss on the proper, in the proper channels, in the proper ways about what the best format is, come together, and then move forward with it, right? So that will be interesting, obviously, for the broader landscape of the sport. So much is changing right now with the House settlement, but you have that big change on the horizon, too, with CFP expansion.
It would make for better content if he just came out and said what he thinks the format should be. But I get it. You want to kind of, do these things in a certain way, and that's how the Big Ten's always operated. The SEC's, it's kind of been a pattern for a long time. The SEC tends to be kind of a more vocal conference, but more out there. It's like, we're the SEC, this is what we want. And the Big Ten's always been kind of more of the operating in the shadows, back channel conversations, playing, I think, just an equally big role as the SEC in terms of driving what's going to happen, but not being as vocal, not being as outward about it. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of that ultimately plays out. Certainly going to be a big topic over next year, because we know for this year it's going to stay at 12 teams. They have changed the seating, but as soon as next year we could potentially be looking at a 14 or 16 team college football playoff. And so that's certainly something. We heard Ryan Day say last week he thinks the Big Ten should get 4 automatic bids. That's something the SEC's been pushing for, but we also heard a week or two ago then the SEC kind of change its tune and say, maybe we just do 5 conference champs and 11 at-larges, which may or may not work out better for the Big Ten and the SEC if you do it that way. If you give them the opportunity to get as many bids as possible, chances are good either way. The Big Ten and the SEC are going to be the most well-represented conferences in the field, to the chagrin of the ACC and the Big 12 and everyone else. But that's certainly a big talking point going forward here this summer and beyond in college sports. Before we wrap up, got to give a congratulations to Jerry Emig, the longtime sports information director at Ohio State. Announced on Thursday that he will be retiring in March. You know, Andy, for me, I think it's the same for you. It's hard to even envision coming here, being on the Ohio State beat, and not seeing Jerry Emig, because dating back to when I was a student back in 2011 as a freshman, he's always been the football SID here. So it's going to be weird when we come back next spring, next March, and somebody else is leading those press conferences. But certainly want to give our congratulations to Jerry. He'll still be around here for one more football season, one last ride as the lead communications director for the Ohio State football team, but someone who, you know, we've gotten to know very well over the course of his job. Someone who I think, you know, you talk about Jerry, I think one of the first things people are going to say about him is like, hey, how kind he is, that he's somebody who's, you know, very friendly. You know, as a media member, will you always agree with him? No, but, you know, he's always, you know, very kind about it. You know, he's somebody that, you know, I've enjoyed getting to know better and better over the years here on the job. And, you know, I think there's, you know, a lot of Jerryisms out there, whether it's, you know, the Jer Bargos or, you know, some of the things that he says in press conferences. I think we're gonna miss those moments of Jerry.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, again, just want to emphasize, you know, the job component of it too. It's like it's a delicate balance that he has had to deal with over the years being a sports information director, where the team wants a certain relationship with the media and the media wants a certain relationship with the team. Those things don't always align, and Jerry's got to try to bridge that gap. But and I think he's been fantastic to work with for me over the years. Not again that we've always agreed on everything. But certainly, I'm certainly going to miss Jerry, and especially for who he is, like outside of the job, and just the more you learn about him as a person. The Big Ten did the whole series on him and his son and raising his son, which I think if you haven't seen that before, it's worth checking out about Jerry Emig. But going to miss him a lot, and I guess we'll see who tries to fill those shoes next year.
Jerry knows if he doesn't call on Andy in a press conference, he gets a nice glare.
A little dirty like
that's happened a few times, but he did call on you today. But no, you're absolutely right. And I mean, I think that would be, if there's one thing to say about Jerry, probably the most important thing to say about Jerry is he's an exemplary father. With, you know, his son, with all the challenges he's had to deal with in his life. You know, Jerry has always put his family first, and has always been there for his son and provided his son the best life he could. And so I think if there's one thing you should know about Jerry, it's that, because for all the stuff we do in this job, that's more important than all of that. And so once again, want to wish Jerry well. Lots more content to come from recruiting camp here at Ohio State, from Ross Bjork's press conference, much more as we kind of keep beating the drum here through this summer. It's hard to believe, Andy, we're already only a little bit more than a month away from going to Las Vegas for Big Ten Media Days.
Yeah, it's coming up fast.
You know, when the season ends in January, it's like the off season flies right by. So we're approaching it pretty fast, folks. We're only about 2.5 months away from that first football game, Ohio State versus Texas. So lots more to come on 11warriors.com. For now, he's Andy Anders. I'm Dan Hope. This has been Press Coverage. Thanks for listening in.